Hey guys, did you hear that?
Issues galore here.
Hear what?
I think it's a wild movie.
Nope. Yeah, I think there's a wild movie out there stalking us or something.
Oh, don't be so uptight. Movies are harmless. They're just big, cute, and cuddly stories. There's nothing to worry about.
No, movies are not cute and cuddly. They are vicious, faith-killing machines designed only to corrupt our minds. We need to reject and run.
They're just mindless entertainment. Let's just hold still and receive it.
No, guys, I think we should fight. I looked it up on Wikipedia. We have a better chance of survival if we stay and fight. I think we can redeem this beast.
In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology.
315 of Popcorn Theology, where we examine films
and they align with the greatest
storyteller.
I'm David.
And I'm Eric.
And I'm Miles. Thanks for joining us as we discuss what themes we can receive, reject, and redeem, and how we can use them for fruitful gospel conversation and mindful movie consumption.
And today we are looking at Cocaine Bear, directed by Elizabeth Banks.
That to me is the most shocking part of this, that it's Elizabeth Banks.
Yeah.
But before we get into the discussion of all of that, a little summary in case you haven't seen this movie. Not that the title doesn't tell you everything, but this is an outlandish story inspired by true events in Georgia in 1985. I'm going to put all that in quotes, inspired by true events. Cocaine Bear tells the tale of a massive black bear that goes on a killing spree after getting hooked on cocaine, which was lost during a botched drug smuggling operation.
Yeah,
typical
Chance
80s kind of story.
Yeah, typical story. Chance or fate brings together an unexpected group of people, including a single mom played by Carrie Russell looking for her lost child. Then there's a group of drug smugglers led by a guy named Sid, and he's played by Ray Liotta. This is actually Ray Liotta's last film appearance before he died. And then Sid sends his underlings, David and Eddie, his son, who's played by Alden, was it Eichenrich? I think is his name. Eric.
Ehrenreich?
Ehrenreich.
That's how
he's the guy who played he's the guy who played Han Solo in Solo.
Yes. And we also have Bob the detective in pursuit of the drug smugglers, a pair of foreign hikers, a park ranger, a group of small-time criminals, and two very unlucky EMTs.
And the guy who was like a wildlife guy, the bear, the quote bear expert, whatever.
The bear expert, yes.
The guy from Modern Family, yeah.
Yeah,
which Elizabeth Banks was in Modern Family, which is probably where those two met and struck up their friendship. Yeah,
it's pretty fun to watch a movie that was probably cast like in a trailer when people are just thinking up ideas, like just calling up their friends
Yeah. It's like it has that Adam Sandler movie type of appeal. Yeah. It's like, hey, you're my friend. Let's go do a movie together.
Yeah, you owe me. Remember? Yeah.
But really,
I think this movie, if you don't know what this movie is about, again, that summary should do it. But there's this fantastic line early in the movie where the kid says, that little guy was an expert on bears, but he didn't know that bear was a cocaine bear. And that tells you everything you need to know about this movie.
Forget everything you thought you knew about bears. This one's on
And
cocaine. Yeah.
Yes, and cocaine. Yep.
And cocaine. And this movie takes place deep in the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia, and its main star is Cocaine Bear, aka Pablo Escobar.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is definitely a movie where there's a lot to talk about, kind of a surprising amount to talk about. So before we get into spoilers, we're going to do this new-ish segment that we've been doing on the podcast where we give the film some popcorn theology ratings. So first, we got the popcorn perspective. And so what did you guys think of the film? Would you call it stale, fresh, or buttered and salted? So again, stale is the bottom, but fresh is the middle, and then buttered and salted is the best. Good, bad versus great. So what do you guys think? And like kind of a short version as to your reason why.
I'd put it somewhere around stale or fresh, like somewhere on that line there. It was enjoyable, and it was fun that somebody actually put together such a bonkers story. It was certainly fun enough to watch. By the way, the R rating is earned here, for language and gruesome bear attacks. So, if you can bear it, you should watch it. I'm not sure I'd highly recommend it. My wife was like, "Oh, what are you covering this week? Cocaine Bear?" She's, "Oh," and I was like, "Yeah, you won't, you won't like it," but I had some fun with it.
How did your son like it? No, I'm just kidding.
So I thought it was fresh-ish. So it was like, it's like it's on the staler end of the fresh, but it's like, it's still enjoyable. And part of the reason it doesn't take itself too seriously at all. It's just that far away from being a B movie. And it's really the budget and production value is really the only thing that just didn't make it a direct to streaming midnight dump.
Yeah. It does seem almost like a sci-fi original kind of movie.
Yeah.
But with a
like
big
a
budget.
Lake Placid, Jaws ripoff kind of movie. And those have their place. They do.
Yeah. It's like a Crocodile, as I think was one of the. there were when this movie came out, there were so many fake, different, like, this type of thing. But one of the ones I remember was Crocodile. Yeah.
Meth Toad.
Meth Toad. Yeah.
I don't know.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Because after I watched this on Prime recommended to me something called, it was either like Crack Jaguar or Cocaine Jaguar, and I watched the trailer because I'm like, what the heck. And I mean, it's like not even fully finished animation. It's beyond bad. And I'm like, I can't even figure out why, like, if this is even supposed to be a real thing. But it's certainly
there's a whole sub industry that makes those movies, and they must be able to make some money. Like Transmorphers that came out after Transformers. Like but there's like a Thor movie that came out. They're like, well, Thor the god is is not copyrighted. It's like, we just got to strip away most of the things you like about Thor or whatever, like.
So Crocodile is currently in pre-production according to IMDb. So,
well, there you go. So if you want to be an extra on Crocodile, we'll have some information for you now. Not really going to have much info for that. But Eric, I think I would agree. I really expected it to be. Didn't have tremendously high hopes for it. But I agree. It was kind of surprisingly fresh-ish. It was exactly because, as you mentioned, it did not take itself seriously. This is not a movie that is a commentary on much of anything, at least not an overt one. Of course, we always dig. That's what we do on this podcast.
Yeah.
But there's something about it that is just kind of a little bit charming, if you can say that about a movie where people are mauled to pieces. Because there's just a lightheartedness to it. Several of the moments where the characters on screen are reacting the way that you're reacting to events, that's kind of fun. Like without getting into detail, when the two EMTs look at each other and scream, you're just like, hilarious. Like, know, and all some way. And follows up Halloween somewhat well, also.
Yep. Okay, so we all know that a film's quality doesn't always reflect like the deep theological talking points. So if we're going to drink from the movie's depths of deep themes, what is in the cup? Is it diluted, carbonated, or my cup runneth over? So essentially, mostly fluff with an idea to an average range of ideas, or just like Matrix level, mind blowing. Yeah. So what do you guys think?
Man, this is pretty far along the spectrum of diluted. It is pretty much just being what it is. Typically, when you're watching a movie, I can ask myself the question, okay, what is this movie saying about X? And there's just not much of a authorial attitude toward the subject matter. There's a little bit that we'll get into, but as far as movies that we've covered, this is pretty far on the spectrum of just diluted. The movie is what it is.
As advertised. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree with diluted. So I'm pretty sure, like when you listen to this, like all three of us are basically probably going to say the same thing, in three different ways. The Venn diagram is pretty tight on this one.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. Honestly, it was a bit diluted, and that doesn't mean that there isn't stuff to talk about, because there's always jumping off points, right? And we can take a small theme and we can explore it. And this movie, honestly, this is kind of a fun exercise, even just in putting my thoughts together into some notes for the episode. So already has been a fun exercise in kind of seeing how far we can push this idea of film and theology, and exploring a film's themes for what we can receive, reject, and redeem. And but all that being said, yeah, it's pretty diluted in this case. It's not the kind that's going to lead to a whole lot of film and theology events or movie nights. Hopefully not at any churches.
There's
like that.
There's not enough payoff for the amount of sin depicted and even kind of celebrated in there. But
I mean, to get anything besides kids good, drugs bad, you're gonna have to dig a little bit, and that's what we're here. We're gonna use those claws, and we're gonna dig for some
Nice.
grubs here. Speaking of which, also, we were talking a little bit off camera earlier. Did you guys happen to bring any bear memorabilia in honor of the episode?
By accident, yes, I did. So my wife got me a fantastic, for those that are looking at the video, a fantastic Stanley Stein. It was very nice, very nice. I have no idea how much it was, but the logo of Stanley is a mythical bear with wings. So I was like,
bear with wings.
I know, with a crown too. So
there's a film idea right there. Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
Nice.
For sure.
Like I do, I do know that we have the right to bear arms, but I don't have bear arms with me. I'm coming in barehanded.
Wah, wah.
I know. James isn't here.
I was gonna say, yeah. So I feel like you're stepping up in James's absence. We got to step up the pun game. This is the kind of movie that deserves puns. I think that's a fair way to say it. So this is actually a T-shirt that I got in South Dakota, off the restaurant called The Vault in Hot Springs, South Dakota, when I worked there. Not at the restaurant, but I worked at a nearby tourist attraction. And so for those who aren't watching the video, it's a bear with antlers, and it just says beer on it. So that's
nice.
It's the kind of shirt
fits.
That doesn't have a ton of application in terms of like really being topical, but sure does right now. So excellent.
Yeah.
But speaking of, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it seems like we basically we're unified in the way that we feel about this movie. It's some good fun. And we're gonna have to dig. We're gonna have to really dig our claws in to pull out some theological content. But that's almost why we picked it. It's something that was streamable, and that's kind of what we were. And as we dig in, I'm actually pretty excited to pull this out as like kind of an exercise in film theology, like David was talking about. But yeah, let's drop some ads, and we'll come back with a spoiler warning and peel back the layers of Cocaine Bear.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Popcorn Theology. If you want to hear more from us, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast catcher.
Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and share this episode with your friends.
Assuming you have friends. To sponsor more content like this, consider supporting Popcorn Theology through Patreon. Then you'll make some friends.
For just $1 a month, you can have friends. You can become a patron saint and be added to our exclusive Facebook group, where you can interact, influence, and vote on future episodes of the podcast.
Well, let's get back to the episode.
So what? Watching. Sorry, technical issues here, but like we said, it's all part of the fun. Don't know what I'm talking about. That's probably for the best. So.
But yeah, this is a.
If you
this
if
movie
you
will
only,
bring-
I was gonna say if you only listen, you don't get to see us dance at the end of the music. So, it's-
Hey, the music in this movie was pretty great. So, 80s music had a certain amount of optimism and, I don't know, maybe boldness to it. Those 80s power ballads. It's only 20 years ago. Wait, 40 years ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's coming up. It's coming up fast.
But here we are diving back into popcorn thoughts with a little bit of spoilers. So again, with a movie like this, how many spoilers could there be?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, you guys thought it was kind of stale or fresh, kind of like those last bits of popcorn. Pop, pop, pop. So what? Yeah, why was that? Why did we like? What are the things that we liked, didn't like? Did anything stick out to you? Because for me, there weren't any particular standout moments for me. The whole time I was like, "This is fun." Was kind of what was going on in the back of my mind, but there wasn't really a standout moment. And each character that came on, I was like, this is pretty well written, kind of fun. They're kind of carrying the movie. It's interesting, but just nothing popped to me.
Yeah, no. I recommend everyone that if you've seen the movie or not seen it, just go watch Pitch Meeting's version of it about this, and it's really funny the details that he goes into and gets. So I would say that this is fresh-ish is what I had picked as a fun movie, but the rewatchability is basically zero. This is the second time that I'd seen it, and as I was watching it through this time, and I actually did. I had no idea. I was like, oh, that's right, I did. So back in May on my own personal Facebook page, I reviewed the movie, and I just put it out there, and I was like, oh wow, I was like, so I went back and looked at my notes, and I had them very much similar thoughts, but this time really watching it, going, wow, the bear kills a lot of just kind of like innocent people, and it's played up for laughs through the entire time. And the first time I watched it, it didn't bother me, and now watching it this time, I was like, yeah, this is a little different. This is a little a little odd to be laughing so heartily about a bear, devouring an innocent person. So
yeah, the first scene of the movie is a couple who are like lovingly taking a hike, and she's pregnant, and they're thinking about what are they going to name their kid? Maybe Texas. I love America.
Yeah,
that's what you get for loving America or something. You have the woman gets
Can you hear me?
torn into the bushes. At least we don't actually see it, but I was like, this is a pretty good setup for a horror movie in terms of having people having a loving, wholesome moment being destroyed by this bear.
Yep.
Well, and then at this point, we lost David, folks who are on the video. In case you're wondering, those who are on the video, we were trying to do as best we can to run this thing live and see if we can do it smoothly, as opposed to needing rescue. But we've got David back.
Nice.
Hello.
Drop
We
your
hear you.
side.
Have I been
David
gone,
is
have I been gone
back.
for a while?
Oh, a little while.
So
Well,
we filled some time. We stretched some time. So
I
now we're
heard
at
you
your
most of the
popcorn
time.
thoughts.
Well,
Okay.
that's the thing. I heard you, and I thought you could hear me or see me, but then it just was.
no.
Yeah, this will
Interesting.
require a lot more cleaning up than I thought. And if any of you do end up watching the video version, then you get to see some of that, because I don't know that we're going to do much editing of that.
Yeah.
And on the audio side, it'll be a lot more pristine,
Yeah.
because I'm more nitpicky about that. So the yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think I heard most of what you guys were saying, so I'll just jump back into it. But I mean, I definitely agree that we're talking about a movie where, if we step back and realize the actual events, it is horrifying. And the movie just kind of plays a lot of it for laughs. And you know, when you know it's the type of movie that it is, and you know that it's pretend, you can kind of just roll with it, if you will. I will say that it was sort of surprisingly fresh. When I heard Elizabeth Banks was directing a movie called Cocaine Bear, I was like, what? So, but I will say this is the second best Elizabeth Banks movie that I've seen in terms of her directing. Have you guys seen the Pitch Perfect movies?
Oh, I didn't know she directed those.
She directed
Some of those are
the
great.
second and the third one. She did not direct the first one. She starred in all of them, but she directed the second and third one.
Ah,
Third, don't bother. It's bad. But 2 is actually quite good. I thought 2 was pretty good. But anyway, in this case, it takes itself about as seriously as you might expect. And I thought it was kind of fun to see a bear treated like a shark, which, if you think about it, shark movies portray sharks as just nom-nom machines. They just are there to devour everything near them. They are only destructive. And there's no like actual sense of like, oh, it's full. It doesn't need to eat right now. No, I just eat. Even if it's not food, I eat. In this case, they came up with a premise that made this feasible for a bear too, which is kind of like, okay, yeah, that's why it has that kind of Jaws-ish vibe to it, because that's how we treat sharks. When in reality, they're both fairly docile. They just hunt in order to get their food, or if they're threatened. They're generally not likely to actually harm people, which is why everyone in this movie was so freaked out. Like, what is happening? We know something about bears. Why is this happening? I also thought it was interesting. I'm curious if you guys thought what you guys thought of this, that it was filmed mostly during the day. I'd say filmed / animated, mostly during the day. That it wasn't, there was one scene in the dark inside, and then there was one kind of lengthy scene outdoors in the dark, but it was still fairly well lit. Yeah. You know, it didn't make use of that. And one, it wasn't trying to be a horror movie. It was trying to be a monster movie. We want you to see the bear. I don't know. It just, that almost made it juxtapose really well. The beauty of nature and the horror of this creature. Because you get a good look at a nice, pretty day in this national park. And then
with butterflies and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it. That's one thing that makes it a little more of a comedy monster movie rather than terrifying. Yeah, that kind of bear at night would be freaky, because bears, you know, doors don't work against bears if they want. No. Like, right. There's not much you can do if a bear wants you. They can smell you. Outside of running serpentine patterns downhill, maybe if you're lucky enough for them to kind of miss you. If a bear wants to kill you, it pretty much can. But fortunately, like you were saying, most of the time they just want your trash or whatever, or want you away from their cubs.
Yeah, they don't generally view humans as because, you know, think about it. You wouldn't want to prey on something that's 2/3 your size. You want to prey on something small that's not going to fight back too much. But I will say, when they have the bear running, I don't know how fast black bears can run, and I didn't think to look it up. I'm sure Dwight Schrute would know that offhand, but you'd be amazed how fast some animals can run. And so the fact that it catches up to the ambulance, I'm like, I'd buy that, especially on cocaine. That would make sense. But I was curious if either of you guys heard about this. There was a documentary released on Peacock when this movie was on Peacock, because I think that was the first place it was streaming. Yeah. Now it's on Prime. Called Cocaine Bear: The True Story. Did you guys hear about this?
I heard about it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would highly recommend either to you guys or our listeners, just check it out. I think it's probably on the free version of Peacock, but if not, you know, you can do a 1-month trial. It's like a 1-hour documentary of the true story of the cocaine bear. And it's every bit as like, I don't know, like they're trying to milk this property, but it's actually a super interesting story. They just keep tying back to the bear. They're like, at this time, the bear was enjoying a normal life, and they just cut to footage of bears, and then they go back to the story. Because what they gloss over in this movie, I'm just going to do a real quick synopsis if you guys don't mind. What they gloss over in this movie is the guy throwing the cocaine out of the plane and doing his like karate moves and stuff. Andrew Thornton was his name, and he was the drug dealer who jumped from the plane and fell to his death. And it actually happened in a driveway right outside someone's house. The homeowner went out and found this guy laying in his yard with a parachute that didn't fully deploy. And there's so much mystery around what happened on the plane. They don't know if he was the only one on the plane, why his chute didn't deploy. If he hit his head, that seems likely that he hit his head and was unconscious. But they're not quite sure what was happening. But this guy, when he fell, he was reported to be wearing Gucci shoes, like Gucci slippers. He had gold coins. He had diamonds and jewels in a pouch. He had 75 pounds of cocaine strapped to his body. And he had a super spy wristwatch that shot nerve gas out of it, or tear gas. I forget which one. And so it was shooting, I believe, tear gas or something. And so it was like a James Bond style watch, 1985. And also just, he was dressed like a soldier of fortune. They're like, what the heck is up with this guy? And then it turns out that they knew who he was. You know, they had been following his drug trade. One of the guys interviewed, he says, when I heard how he died, I wasn't surprised. And I'm like, if that doesn't tell you a little bit about this guy, it's a fascinating story. He's a wealthy Kentucky blue blood who became a dirty cop and started smuggling drugs. The story, there's a lot more to it than that, but the story has intrigue, murder, and even, for those movie buffs listening, a tie-in with actor Woody Harrelson. And so I'll let you explore that more. But there's a huge difference between the true story and the movie, namely that nothing about the bear happened like at all. There was a bear.
It's based on a true, inspired by a true story. This
inspired by real organisms. That's about where we're at with it. Yeah. There were bears. There are bears. That's a thing. Cocaine is a thing. And they said one of the pouches or one of the bags fell in the forest and the bear ate some of it. But a lot of it was missing. And they thought, oh, the bear must have eaten 75 pounds of cocaine. It's like, that's not possible. They did tox screens. I think it ate about 3 ounces and died, which makes sense. It's kind of what you would expect. And so, but this is basically a movie that's asking, like, what if that happened? What if something happened differently with the bear?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's
a very fun
story,
what if.
Yeah, it's a romp. But it's just a quick aside. I just felt the need to throw that out there, that somebody read about that or saw the taxidermied bear, which is probably not the real bear. And then said, what if this movie what if it went differently? And so, you know, it's just with that out of the way in terms of the historical nature, believe it or not, this is not exactly a historically accurate movie. But with all that being said, it's still, you know, it's not exactly purported to be one, and it's mostly for fun. So, but yeah, it sounds like we've got our popcorn thoughts kind of addressed pretty well. And so now is probably a good time for us to dig a little deeper, right?
Nice.
So that sound means that it's time to pour and sample the more spiritual aspects of this film and its narrative. So let's shift the gears and discuss the themes of Cocaine Bear, which is still one of the most ridiculous statements ever. In my review, my Facebook review that I did, I said it probably has the record for saying the name of the film. Cocaine Bear. Well, anyway, so now this seems like a story that couldn't be further from Scripture, right, Miles? Like, Scripture has nothing to say about bears, right?
Yeah, Scripture has nothing. Yeah,
or cocaine.
For your information, bears are mentioned at least a dozen times in Scripture. Thanks,
Dwight.
If you search bear in Scripture, you actually get like 250 verses. Most of those are about bearing fruit, but
bearing
the animal
burdens and things.
all those kind of things, right? But the animal bear is mentioned at least 12 times. So, for example, we have like you might remember when David is preparing to fight Goliath, and he's saying, "Look, I defended my sheep from bears and lions. You know, when they would grab a sheep, I would grab its mane and I'd kill it," which is just a pretty epic thing to remind yourself of. Here's what God has gotten me through. I fought off a bears, and now this giant that is dressed like a large dragon with scaly armor. It's like God helped me defend my sheep then. He's going to help me defend my sheep now, which is just pretty epic. Then there's a couple of times where God's wrath is depicted as a bear attacking. And then in the book of Revelation, you have a beast that looks like a bear appearing in terms of those metaphors for forces that are aligned against God. And so this is something, the Syrian bear was something that our biblical writers had in their cultural imagination. So it's something that we have in common. But ultimately, the way a lot of these bears are used, a theme that stuck out to me is that mankind and his wicked decisions are sometimes worse than wild animals. So like Proverbs 17:12 says, "Let man meet a she-bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly," which I think would be a good theme verse for this whole movie.
Yes.
Yep.
Because
don't get between her and her cubs.
Yeah. Or between her and her cocaine, which like, so if we want to get ethical real quick, is what happens when people take drugs is that drug becomes their idol, the thing that they value most. And you had a bear that shifted from normal bear behavior to being coke addicted. But the question that the movie basically invites the audience to ask is, who is the real monster here? Is it the coke addicted bear, or is it the horrible drug dealer? And so ultimately, as the movie develops, you see the drug dealer Sid, you know, his actions launch the whole plot with this drug running scheme. And by the end of the movie, Sid is proven to be worse of a creature than the cocaine bear. You know, he's a proverbial fool. He has no fear of God. He does not have a concern for the weak. In the end, little Henry says, you know, you're a piece of crap person and a bad dad. And so I don't, did you guys catch any of that? I think was one of the core elements of depth in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it was inviting us to ask that kind of question. I mean, that really what we're seeing here is and that kind of gets into the theme that I'll discuss a little more later, which is, you know, who's essentially the guy. But yeah, it does seem that that we're dealing with a movie that is in a genre, a monster genre, but kind of adjacent to the horror genre, that is going to be tending towards certain patterns and tropes, if you will. And therefore it does invite us to ask questions. And that's why I wouldn't call this movie complete. I mean, that's why I wish we had a fourth category. Like, it's not quite diluted. There's nothing to it, but there's not much to it. There's something there.
Yeah.
But,
nothing is fully, nothing is empty.
That's an empty cup. Right. Yeah. There we go. There's the fourth category. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, no, I agree. When we get to my main talking point, fools was basically one of the main things that I wanted to talk about and get at. But yeah, that verse that you had there is one that I went to immediately as well. Is, let a man meet a she-bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. And if anything that this movie could do is like just watching what a bear, if it chose to kill, what it could do to a human. And it's bloody, it's brutal, it's quick. I mean, there's literally what we were talking about. There's nothing that you cannot stop a bear. Like, unless you have a really big gun, you cannot stop it. I did look at this up. They can run 30 miles an hour. So you have something that's 500 pounds running at 30 miles an hour. You are not going to stop that. And yet scripture says it's worse to meet a fool in his folly than it is a she-bear who's protecting her cubs. And just, you could marinate on that for years and just look around you and go, it's true. It's true.
And so in this movie, you have those two things are contrasted. That it's a proverbial movie in all of its silliness. You have Sid as the fool, and we often think of fool as somebody who's dumb, But he's not necessarily dumb. He doesn't fear the Lord, as the Bible would describe a fool, right? He doesn't care about his grandson. He doesn't care about his son in his grief. He doesn't care about his son who wanted to escape the drug world. He's actually disappointed in that. He doesn't care that random people or kids are involved in this whole crazy situation. He doesn't care that his most loyal person, David, is hurt. He's hurt it's funny. David is hurt at the beginning of the movie, and he continues to get injured throughout the whole movie, increasingly injured.
Yeah.
All right. Instead, Sid just wants the cocaine. And what's interesting is that outside of that first death in the movie of the pregnant woman, the bear kind of acts as like a classic monster movie pattern, where the monster often kills the correct people, right? The bad guys are killed, the bad fools are killed. Actually, I think I saw in this movie that most of the fools of this movie were killed, like Sid and a lot of his underlings and some of the worst people. But also the other group that's killed pretty reliably is the people who try to help the fool in their folly. Like the EMTs and the park rangers to actually, or to try to deal with what they've created, which is, you have this bear, naturally they're pretty dangerous, you got to be wise around them. What happens if something that destroys human lives that we've used to destroy ourselves, cocaine, enters the picture? A guy like Sid doesn't care, and he brings it into the picture. And so you have the fools in this movie who die. The drug smuggler in the plane at the beginning of the movie, he dies because of his foolishness. The wannabe gangsters, they get beaten up by David, then killed by the bear, except for the one. Then you have Sid, who dies in the end. Which what was really interesting here is Sid dies like Judas. Did you guys see this? So we have two accounts of the death of Judas, and like the internet atheists will be like, Bible contradiction, because in Matthew 27, it says that he felt regret. He threw the silver into the temple. He went out and hanged himself. And then in Acts chapter 1, when Peter's describing Judas's death, he said, falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and his bowels gushed out. And what you have at the end of Sid in this movie is he's hanged by his drug duffel bag, at least at first, and then his bowels are cut open, and then he falls into the river. And I was like, did somebody write this? Like, did somebody? So I thought that was a pretty neat, in terms of digging for a biblical connection, to be like, he dies like Judas. That's kind of awesome.
Here's my question then: would that be kind of similar to the explanation of the apparent contradiction there? Is that it possibly was both, that he threw the money down, then he went and got the money and bought the field, and then he hanged himself in the field, and then when he fell from the hanging, I guess there's probably different schools of thought on this, but
that's the quickest way I've seen apologists respond to that apparent contradiction is, look, he I don't actually know if he died in the field of blood that they bought. I think I'm not even sure if it's the same field, but I often think that Acts 1, the falling headlong, might just be like a colloquial phrase of like, he fell, right, and he's dead, right? That's one that I like when I've kind of wrestled with this, that he hanged himself, but the idea is he was, a few hours before, he was one of the disciples of Jesus, and he fell, and then maybe they said he burst open in the middle of a field, like this gruesome death.
Not to be graphic, but when you are hung and die, your bowels do release. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Like they void, yes, to not be crass. But like that's the thing, I guess, that I was thinking as well, is that it could be that he fell after some time and after the rope gave, or something like that. But
that's what people have suggested, right? So it's an issue, but it's hardly an insolvable issue. And I do found it really funny that Sid both hung himself by his cocaine bag, and the bear that he got hooked on cocaine then burst his bowels open, which is like a similar way that Judas, filled with regret in this great betrayal of Jesus, died that way. And one of the more gruesome passages in Scripture matches up pretty well with one of the more gruesome movies I've watched in the last few years.
Agreed. Yeah, there does seem to be some powerful imagery there. I mean, and then additionally, we get this pattern that you mentioned already, which is who is it that lives and who dies, with the exception of a couple innocent folks. And I would throw Peter in the mix too. What's his name? Jesse Tyler Ferguson is the guy from Modern Family who plays that guy. But you're right, he's the type that he was helping one of the more wicked people, the cowardly park ranger, who, and again, is it a mortal sin? I don't know. I mean, but we're dealing with characters who show deep flaws being the ones who end up getting it, if you will. And then, the question then, who is it that ends up living? We get the proverbial mama bear, right? Carrie Russell, and her cubs that she saved.
Yeah.
And they're smart. They're some of the smarter people in the movie. The bereft husband is saved. The loyal friend is saved. Those who show, if you will, you can almost, I mean, if you really want to stretch, you can maybe draw some parallels here to some of the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who look after their friends and get their fingers shot off, for their fingers will be sewn back on. But no, they won't, because the dog chews them up. I mean, stretch, no question. But,
no, but that's how you dig. That's how you dig. And
for sure.
But no, I mean, if you want to dig the corrupt police lady, she lives at the end too, but it's because she turned her back to Sid, or turned her back to sin, and walked away. So you can do it that way. But no, it's like this idea is kind of crazy to think. It's like, again, that she bear, like the incredible power that it has, yet being with a fool is worse. And so a she bear will kill you to save her offspring, but the fool will actually hunt down your loved ones. And because that's really what, at the end of the day, that's what Sid's saying is, if I don't do this, now granted, he has his own self-pride and everything like this, but he is saying, like, if I don't do this, the Colombians are going to come and kill all of us. They're going to wipe out the entire operation as vengeance. And it just shows, like, never get in bed with a fool in any way.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of a point I hadn't put in here. With one of the bear verses I like is from the book of Amos, where Amos is talking to the people of God, or people of Israel, and he's saying, the day of the Lord is coming. And it's like, woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. Why would you have the day of the Lord? It is darkness and not light, as if a man fled from a lion and a bear met him, or went into a house and leaned his hand against the wall and a serpent bit him. So it's like Sid, because he's been a fool, it's like the day of the Lord is coming for you one way or the other. And Sid now is trapped between police and the Colombians and a cocaine bear of his own creation, right? All of these things. He's fleeing from one place to the other. And the bear ends up, in a funny way, being a tool of the day of the Lord to bring justice upon the fool. And a lot of people are destroyed as collateral damage. But it's better to encounter a bear robbed of her cubs than a fool in his folly. Like, that is
absolutely
the main point there.
Yeah. For sure. And I feel like there definitely are some other themes worth exploring. And one of them that kind of piggybacks off of that really stood out to me is that one of the things that the film does address, again, it's subtext, right? Because most of the text is the words cocaine and bear together. The subtext is that, the film is kind of addressing the relationship between man and nature, right? If the bear is exemplary of nature, it seems to suggest that the bear is innocent and is corrupted by the effects of man. And the effects of man are the giving it of cocaine. And so, like you said, who's the real bad guy? Is it actually the bear? Or is it the guy who gives it cocaine? Or the guy who at least is implicated by the one who made the cocaine fall from the sky? So, basically the statement, it seems to be implying that nature is good and the mankind corrupts nature. I mean, is that kind of what you guys were thinking related to this?
I did have a similar thought along those lines, is that, like, the bear's just doing what the bear's going to do. It's the influence of man's sin that causes the bear to go on this rampage. Because if man wasn't trying to get high off these drugs and stuff like that, they wouldn't have been smuggling it, and all of that. And then bear gets into it, and the bear then goes and wreaks havoc on all these people. I kind of similar vein of thought with that.
Yeah, and then the movie seems to be arguing for this. In the end, when little Henry is yelling at Sid, he tells him, "You did this. This was you." It's like, from our perspective, a bear might kill one or two people on its own, just in terms of guarding its cubs, or maybe it's hungry, but does not go on a killing rampage unless it's influenced by a fool and his folly and sin. And so there is that, and there is a broader thing. I imagine for modern audiences, like what David is talking about, that nature would have been just fine if human beings hadn't introduced themselves and this, in particular, this substance and these conflicts into nature. And so there's a little bit of like reject, redeem in there, I think.
Right. Because, yeah, exactly. And for those who maybe are not as familiar with those terms, we talk about receive as things that are themes in a story that we would say are consistent with the biblical worldview, that we can take, kind of take that and generally agree with it. Then some we can just reject. And then there are others that we would say it's close, but not quite exactly what we're saying that Scripture is teaching. And so in this case, I would say that this is pretty clearly in the redeem category, because there is something to be said for this story making that case and making some sense, where the bear likely wouldn't have been doing anything harmful without the influence of the cocaine. As a quick aside, though, I think it's worth pointing out that we're very quick to excuse the actions of the bear when it's doing this, but we would be less quick to excuse the actions of a person who did the exact same thing. That alone points to the image-bearing nature of people, right?
Yeah.
If a person got high on cocaine and slaughtered a bunch of people, we wouldn't say, "Oh, well, it was the drugs." They're only influenced by the drugs. We'd say, "No, they chose to do the drugs, and then they chose to do these actions while their minds were altered by the drugs." Again, we hold humans to a different standard because we are different. But in this case, we tend to think of nature as lovely and innocent, and we kind of get that pictured in this movie, in those moments of the beauty of the Chattahoochee National Forest. And one of the reasons that we get that picture about nature is that we interact with it on our own terms. We go to nature preserves. We go out and we talk about nature, and we eat food that's natural, and we go and we interact with nature, and then we go to our house and we kind of close the door off to it. I imagine that people in Kenya who have to fight lions off of their cattle that are their livelihood and save their family from wild animals probably don't view nature quite the same way that we do. We live in a fairly luxurious setting. I mean, and ultimately, science and Scripture both reveal a world that is marred by sin. And so what we're not seeing is a world where animals are innately good. We're seeing a world where they are not held to the same moral standards as humans, but they are, in fact, broken. So, the world itself is marred by sin. And even the very cocaine that this movie centered around is derived from a plant. It's plant-based, as you could say. If you were to market it today, it's all plant-based ingredients. We're dealing with the coca plant produces this. Many plants make toxins to ward off herbivores or other plants. A lot of herbicides. There we go. Herbicides are actually produced by plants trying to kill other plants. And so there's a tremendous amount of that type of violence. Nature isn't nice. Much of it actually wants to kill you, and will if it has the chance. Not so much bears, but like bacteria and viruses. There's so much of the world that wants to kill you. That for us to think of nature as pleasant and lovely really tells us something about how we view it. But this is also consistent with what we think of Scripture, because even this is in the end is the result of human sin. Human sin is ultimately the basis for this. During the fall, God cursed creation because of man, not just man and woman and mankind, but he cursed creation. There's many verses about this, but Romans 8 does a really good job describing the creation as groaning in the pains of childbirth, eagerly awaiting the return of Christ. It was subjected to futility by those who subjected it. And in this case, that's not a guy, kicking cocaine out of an airplane. That's Adam taking the fruit, taking a very different type of fruit in the garden. But what we ultimately see is that return of Christ, that's foreshadowed even in the Old Testament. Isaiah 11 gives us a picture of what it will look like by pointing back to the Garden of Eden. And it describes violent carnivores and herbivores living at peace. We could have the quote, the deer and the bear, if you will.
Yeah, there is
together.
a Bible verse about the deer and the bear.
Exactly, right? The lion and the lion eating straw like an ox, and you've got wolves and lambs, kids playing over fox or snake holes. That's a good idea, but it's not a problem there. I imagine that being a parent would be a lot different there. You don't have to worry about the kids getting hurt quite so much.
Yeah.
And so, while things like the cocaine bear do exhibit the fallen world we live in, we can look forward to a time when even the bear and the deer are going to be okay. They're going to lie down together and rest. So I don't know. There's a lot there, ranty, if you will, from me. But did anything like that cross your minds during the movie? Did you have any similar or related thoughts?
Oh yeah. This does remind you of your mankind's basic relationship to nature. Right? Like I think a lot of our biblical paradigm is that in Genesis 1, the whole world was perfect, because a lot of people mistakenly believe that the Garden of Eden was the whole world. But if you look at Genesis 1, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over every other thing that creeps on the earth." And so you have, even in a creation without moral sin, without human sin, there's a challenge there at least, and we can wrestle with what that meant. But the idea is continue to make the garden bigger is basically, I think, the most fair way to understand that. And then even in Genesis chapter 3, what did Adam and Eve fail to do? They fail to have dominion over a snake, over a creature. Right? They don't subdue creation in that way, and they join a rebellion and try to usurp God's authority. All of this, they fall under a serpent and they fail to follow God. And then what I find interesting is later on in Genesis 9, after the flood, right? Things have gone terribly. The flood of cocaine bear, the destruction of creation because of man's folly. God sends Noah and his family out. And in Genesis 9, 1-2, it says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth.'" So it's the same basic blessing. And then what's an interesting thing I didn't realize until a few years ago is this: "The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish in the sea. Into your hands they are delivered." And so it's similar to the call God gives to Joshua, like, be strong and courageous, go in and subdue the earth. But now there's an even more intense relationship with wild animals, with beasts and birds, and this speaks to the major threat that animals, like you were talking about, the lions in the jungle and in the plains, like wild animals have been a major threat to people, to basically everybody except for people in the West in the last 150 years or 200 years. Like nature
pretty much
has been a huge aspect of their life. And this movie reminds you the beauty of the nature and the terror of a bear that could snatch you up at any moment.
Right, exactly. That you're powerless against. I mean, and that's the other thing, is that there just seems to be really a powerlessness. Even when, and I'm always baffled by this in movies, when there's a movie where the main could easily be killed by a gun, and the characters have guns, like, you have to do some real contrivance to, like, not have them use the guns. Like, I complained about this during a couple of the Jurassic Park movies, where I'm like, why didn't they shoot it? Why didn't they shoot the thing? Like, they're not
in the Jurassic Park book, they have a rocket launcher. They blast a couple of them.
Yeah, dude. Yep. Muldoon does not hold back in the book. It's fantastic. But like, in this one, there's characters with guns, and of course, the one with the gun is the least responsible I've ever seen with a gun.
Oh man, it's so bad.
But yeah, I mean, in this type of story, we really are kind of invited to ask the question about, like, is nature, like, what's wrong with nature? Is it us that's influencing nature? And again, to kind of put a bow on it, yes, but not necessarily. It's not fallen because of our actions right now, but because of original sin. Yes, mankind as a whole, our actions certainly affect nature, but it's not fallen because of our current actions. It's fallen because of Adam's actions. And then we get to play a part in redemption of that. And so that's something that we're honored to play a part in redemption, in the same way that we're honored to play a part, albeit small, in the redemptive narrative. Not that we're participants, but we are caretakers of the message, and we pass that along. So anyway, we get to be part of that. And so as we move on, Eric, what was one of the themes that stood out to you in all of this? You said something about fools earlier.
Yes.
Mr. T asked of you.
So I would title mine "The Folly of Fools," and so kind of what you were saying is like the call to the Christian is to, like, Christ is redeeming the world, and instead of adding additional sin into the world and corrupting nature even further, we should be not doing that. Well, this movie is very much about those who choose to mock the good things of the world, and or mock the efforts of people trying to reduce negative influences in the world. Let's put it that way. And then the other people who are actively doing bad things to the world. And so one of the first things that kind of stuck out to me was, it showed from the anti-drug videos from the 80s. It was like, this is your brain on drugs. It's like taking one thing of crack. It's like putting a loaded gun in your mouth and then pulling the trigger. And it's like, those have been so played out now over the last 40 years that we laugh. In South Park a couple years ago, they had the drug enforcement teacher, and he was like, "Drugs are bad, okay, kids." It was like, and that's what it was. That's what it was. And this whole entire movie, it plays drugs as a laugh. The kids do coke. The kids do coke, and they're like, oh, they coughing up and everything like that. And it's like, oh yeah, it's like, ha ha ha, kids are doing cocaine. Aha, look, a bear's doing cocaine. It's all just played for laughs. Whereas the reality is, communities like Chattahoochee, Georgia, are destroyed because of drugs. I mean, Appalachia, which I'm not sure if it goes all the way down in that area, but I know it's up here in Virginia. Appalachia it's a lot of areas are extremely unsafe because of drug usage. And it just goes down to that verse. Again, this verse, I picked this verse independently from Miles, is let a man meet a she-bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. And these fools in their folly, they can be like the Sid type of character who is actively evil, or it can be the fool of a child, like the kids. The kids ditching school, trying cocaine for fun. It's this folliness that's there. Some don't get their just deserve. Some would seem way more. It was like you had said, Miles. Someone tried to help the fool in their folly, and then they got destroyed. As a consequence because of it. And is one of the things is he dies. This is Proverbs 5:23. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray. And I just see this with Sid in particular. It's like he's so deep in his sin of where he is that he started to lie to himself now that he's actually doing this for his family. Yet you just look around and see how he's treating his grandson. You look around and see how he's treating his son, who is grieving and going through a terrible thing right now. Yeah, maybe he shouldn't have dropped his son off with the drug dealing grandfather. But it's like not the wisest choice. Definitely getting the tattoo of John on his chest too. But it's just this digging in, and then Proverbs 19:3 says, When a man's folly brings his ways to ruin, his heart rages against the Lord. And you can see this again in Sid. Is again, this is kind of like Frankenstein. It was like, who's the monster? Well, Frankenstein is. Yeah, Adam was the creature. Yeah, but Frankenstein was the monster. Is when you start to see is that no, Sid says he's doing this for his family. He says he's doing it for all this, but when he's faced with it, when we've got this cocaine, we've got it. We can go. Let's get out of here. The bear's coming. He still rages against that to the point where it's like he's holding a gun to children.
Yeah.
And it's like this is not something good in this man. But at the same time, we see with the mom how it's a classic girl power type of move and stuff like that. When she gets the gun and she racks it, she points it back at him. And you're like, oh yeah, there's the mama bear right there. That's the real mama bear. And this film did surprisingly touch on that. Like, even though Sid was a bad father, the son, son's name was Eddie, the son was still in some ways wanting that approval. And the kids, like the daughter, was acting up the way she was acting up because she wanted her mom's attention and stuff. And so this film actually did talk to I would say maybe the eternal is not the right word, but essentially like the human need for family and our search for it. And our current culture, these types of movies are kind of like they hit on family a lot. It's really one of the only tricks left in in the book and Hollywood writing is, hey, family. Yeah, that made family
good.
But it was kind of interesting that we had this. And then last thing to kind of put this on to bed, I guess I would say. But one little quote that I did like is when Eddie and the punk, I'll just call him the punk. I don't know his name. Right, yeah. We're talking, and he was talking about the lizards. And he's like, lizards are good listeners, but people are good hearers. And it's a stupid saying, but I was like, it's actually kind of funny. That's like, this is what Eddie needed this entire time, was just someone to listen and actually hear and respond to him. And he gets that at the end of the movie with David, where David knew the entire time when they were playing 20 questions that the answer the entire time was Joni.
Yeah.
And it's like, and they're able to mend their friendship. But yes, to end with the fools and their folly is Ecclesiastes 7:29, and this is going about the difference between nature or the created order and man himself. Is the bear was essentially just corrupted nature in this movie. It was nature that had been extra corrupted, but it was man in this film who was actively seeking out evil. And Ecclesiastes 7:29 says, "See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes." And I just thought of this entire movie of like how it goes. And this is more of a downer point, if you want to put it that way. In the inner lightning round section, I'll talk a little bit more positive stuff. But is again, I think the warning, if you want to take it as a warning of this film, is very much stay away from fools and don't be a fool yourself, because it's better to meet the she-bear. It's better to meet the she-bear than it is to meet the fool.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, we're definitely seeing the consequences of people's actions, and there's something about these that really resonates well. This sort of, you could call it karma if you really want. That would not be correct, but you could call it karma. You could call it an act of God, that we're seeing something from nature taking people out. We talked about bears earlier. I mean, she bears took out the guys who were mocking Elisha, I think it was, or Elijah.
Yes,
Elisha is right after the mantle passed. 2 Kings 2, I think.
That's the first thing he did with it.
But it's not. It's one of the first. But but it's not karma. Remember, karma, you basically pay for the sins of your previous life. When you do something in this life and you receive discipline for it or punishment, The best system to think of that is divine justice. That's one thing that frustrates me about our cultural moment. One of the little pet peeves is people go, karma. No, karma is about you in the past. And it's actually, it seems to be inherently unjust because you can't even remember what that guy or gal did, but little pieces of divine justice, providence. But anyway, that's starting. That's like lightning round material. I think we could dive into that, right?
I was going to say, it seems like it's that time to see what other themes we can sift in a little bit of our lightning round of the game we call Receive, Reject, and Redeem. We usually group these together, first reject, and then the kind of receive, redeem ones, because those go together well. Is there anything right out the gate that you guys think we can reject about this movie? Gentlemen?
Yeah, for me, it was in general just the casualness they dealt with drugs in it. I don't know if the movie was trying to be casual or whatever, and it's like, drugs aren't actually that big of a deal, or they were just playing it up. But I know people who have had a more lackadaisical approach to drugs and stuff like that, and it has destroyed and wrecked their lives. It won't wreck your life today or tomorrow or 4 weeks from now, but give it time, and a couple years down the road, it will destroy everything that you have ever touched. And just the casualness of drugs, I would just say, just reject that outright. Laugh at the movie, absolutely, but reject any thought that it's that drugs are okay.
Yep. Yeah, and eventually it might destroy the people who try to help you, like the bear did in this movie. That's the big reject. That's a good one. What about receive or redeem? Do we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as another quick reject point, which it's terrible weapons handling. I'll throw that.
Oh yeah,
too, at least one of the deaths was just completely muzzle action trigger, right? Like, I mean, just don't handle weapons if you don't know what the heck you're doing. But yeah, as far as things we can receive and redeem, kind of back to my point, man corrupting nature. Kind of. I would put that in the receive/redeem category. We are responsible. We're caretakers of creation. And when we do a poor job of that, there's consequences. But it's not necessarily in this case that nature's fallen due to our continued sin. That's the continued effects of our sin on nature, which can still be increasingly bad. But it's not that recent corruption. And it goes back to original sin. And it's certainly not as simple as is portrayed here. But again, it's not trying to be nuanced. So
yeah, again, that was us digging, huh?
Yeah.
I liked the beginning of this movie where you have Eddie. So he's deep in grief, but he's still on the path of rejecting the drug dealer lifestyle, which had to have been more lucrative, and also would have maintained a relationship with his dad. And him rejecting the drug dealing lifestyle and his wicked father just reminded me of the cost of discipleship, that sometimes you really do have to drop things and leave them behind in order to walk the right path. And I thought there was a little illustration there that was pretty good for us.
Yeah. As Jesus said, is if you do not hate father and mother for my sake, you're not worthy of the kingdom. And it's that type of thing where it's like, no, dad is wrong. Dad is evil. In this case, dad is evil. And I need to turn my back on the family completely. And you see that it's this sanctifying approach that was taken. But one of the I'm not sure if it would be a redeem / receive. It's more of, I guess, more of just tangential thought is so life and death situations actually have a sanctifying effect on humanity. So mom and dad are now closer than they've ever been. The daughter's actually like, hey, can we actually, I'm ready to go out on the weekend with this guy. They actually talk about their feelings at that point instead of just two ships passing in the night. Then Eddie and David's friendship is renewed and mended. They become actually much better friends than they would have been beforehand because of everything that they've gone through. And I would say, just on that note, is like, do not wait for those life and death situations to come in your life to go and mend relationships. Go and be reconciled today with whoever you can. that there's any issues between you. Go and be reconciled today. Don't wait until either it's too late or almost too late.
Amen.
Mm.
Amen.
Yeah, for sure.
I also like that we had a couple good parenting examples in spite of people who are parents, in spite of the disappointment in their child or their dog. So we had Sari or Sherry. The names were spelled weird in this movie. But she was disappointed in her daughter who ran away. But still, it was Mama Bear Sherry versus Cocaine Bear, right? And she didn't care, which is just a great picture, right? Mama Bear versus Mama Bear. And then you had the cop Bob, who was disappointed that his dog Rosetta couldn't fetch and wasn't more fun, but he still took care of her and still loved her. And that was kind of great. And Eddie ends up receiving the dog at the end, right? The grief matches some companionship. But then you have, in contrast with Sid, he tells Eddie, "You're no son of mine," because Eddie is leaving the life of drugs and wouldn't turn the gun on the kids and things like that. And so you have two pretty good parenting examples, and then one all about how parents will still love their kids, or won't in Sid's case, when their kids disappoint them. And so I think in terms of like a nice God connection in this movie is it just reminds us that God is a good shepherd and a good father who rescues his sheep and wayward children even when they wander, right? His heart is still for them. It's more like Sherry, more like Bob and his dog than Sid hating his kids saying, "You're no son of mine." At least on this side of death, like he pursues us, he cares for us, he goes into the forest and faces the bear for us, right? So like there's a little bit of a connection there when you have good parents who are willing to lay down their life for their kids and pursue them. But that's an illustration of love that's worth redeeming when we see that, oh, God is the perfect picture of the imperfect picture shown in those characters.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and that's what it's really all about, right? It is, in this case, what we're trying to do is to understand these stories well, and because they're made by people who bear God's image, they're going to point to him in some ways, and then in other ways, because we're fallen, they're going to point away from him. And so we try and sort of sift that narrative. So this has been a good episode. Before we go, we should mention a couple things that we want to encourage you guys to do, which is like and share this episode with your friends. You may be surprised at how many of them enjoyed this movie too. I every time I ask people about this movie, they kind of get a smile on their face. They're like, yeah, right? I watched Cocaine Bear. It's almost a guilty pleasure movie, but yeah, share this episode. Let's broaden the conversation.
Yeah, and if you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to the podcast or follow us on social media. We're often on there interacting. So if you think our podcast was great, tell us. If you think our points needed adjustment, tell us. We want to be smarter. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, YouTube, all of those places you can reach out to us.
Yeah. One quick way you can also help support the podcast is just to rate and review it, the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen. Or you can support us financially through Patreon.
Yep. And donating just $1 a month will make you a patron saint. And with inflation, that dollar is getting more and more value per 100 cents. Yeah.
So we appreciate them more and more.
We'll bring you in. Yeah. We'll bring you in. You could be one of our cubs. And we will we'll take
it'll be super easy. Barely an inconvenience.
Barely an inconvenience. You could come into our Bear's Den of film and theology type insights, become part of our group, and join the Discord server. There's good conversations there. And then importantly, if you loved or hated us doing Cocaine Bear, you can vote on future episodes and steer the conversation either into a forest or along the paved pathway.
Hopefully not into a tree.
The power is yours. Yeah, not up a tree if we're being chased by bears.
Oh my goodness! Somewhere James is smirking about all of these puns.
He's corrupted us
here, for sure. And so, as a quick aside, as the days get shorter and the temperatures drop and things get cooler, you may want to pick up some merchandise for the season. So we've got coffee mugs. If you're watching the video, you can see some of our merch behind Eric. We're kind of leaving beach towel season, but you could use it as a blanket or just a regular towel, I suppose.
Or a wall decoration like I have.
Or a wall hanging. Exactly. We've got t-shirts. We got stickers. We got all kinds of stuff. Click on the link in the show notes. That'll take you to the merch store. and pick up some Popcorn Theology merch as a gift for your friends and family for Christmas or Thanksgiving or Hanukkah, whatever. So just something to think about, something to consider as we approach that season, for sure. So in the meantime, everyone, keep engaging media from a godly worldview, and remember that you are not a mindless consumer.